Welcome back to my channel, friends. Today, I have a particularly disturbing case that many of you have been requesting. Today, we'll be discussing the tragic story of James Bulger. James was a 2-year-old boy, the son of Denise and Ralph. Denise had always lived in Liverpool, England, where she raised James with her husband. Coming from a large family, she always dreamed of being a mother. James was a sweet child, loved by everyone, and Denise described him as an inquisitive little boy who learned quickly, impossible not to love. On February 12, 1993, Denise took young James to a shopping center called New Strand, located just 10 minutes from Liverpool. It was a cold morning, and Denise dressed James in a red puffer jacket, gloves, and a scarf. They arrived at the mall, where they wandered around, and before leaving around 3:30 p.m., Denise decided to stop by the butcher's shop. James started to explore a bit, but Denise was always keeping an eye on him. She lost sight of him for just a moment while reaching for her wallet. Imagine, it took only a split second to look away, and suddenly, James was gone. Panic set in. Denise rushed out of the shop, thinking he might have just stepped outside, but there was no sign of him. She went to the mall reception to make announcements and search for him, but there was no luck. Eventually, they called the police. Officer Media Waller arrived and tried to speak with Denise, but she was inconsolable, crying and unable to articulate her fear that James would never wander off on his own. He was a shy, calm child. Initially, both Denise and the police thought James might have simply wandered into another shop, but by 5:30 p.m., when the mall was closing, there was still no sign of him. The police began searching the streets and reviewed all the mall security footage to trace his movements. There were 16 cameras, and the police focused on the butcher shop, knowing the exact time Denise and James were there. They found footage showing James leaving the shop at 3:39 p.m., just a minute before Denise emerged frantically searching for him. The next day, the police held a press conference asking for the public's help. They knew James had been with these two boys, but the footage was too grainy to identify them. Based on what they could see, the two appeared to be white teenagers, around 13 to 15 years old. They published their images in the papers, urging anyone with information to come forward. Denise appeared frequently on TV, pleading with anyone who had seen her son to step forward. As you can imagine, Denise was desperate, and her emotional appeals moved the entire nation. Before James, Denise had lost another child, a daughter who was stillborn, which made her even more protective of James. When the police broke the news to Denise, they reported that she let out a heart-wrenching scream, one that the officers would never forget. She fell into a state of shock, staring blankly as if she had left her body, remaining in that state for hours. James's body was discovered by two brothers, Terrence and James Riley, and some friends. This traumatic event scarred those boys for life. Their grandmother later recounted that they were never the same, with Terrence eventually turning to drugs and facing multiple arrests, attributing his downward spiral to having found James's body that day. The medical examiner quickly determined that James's death was no accident. He had suffered horrific abuse before ending up on those tracks. The details were so shocking that it was hard to comprehend. The police then held another press conference, announcing that they were now treating it as a murder case, and emphasized that someone out there must know who the two boys with James were. They were now the primary suspects. Denise moved in with her mother, and both women were in such profound grief that they could barely speak to one another. They couldn't even share the same room, overwhelmed by their pain. The investigators continued their work, struggling to come to terms with the horror of what had happened. The community in Liverpool was devastated. Hundreds of people came together to honor James, leaving flowers, teddy bears, and candles in memory of the little boy. Every parent's nightmare came true when they realized how easy it was to lose a child in an instant. In fact, after this tragedy, there was a surge in sales of child leashes as parents sought to keep their kids close. Authorities warned everyone to be vigilant, reminding them that James had gone missing for only a few seconds. They desperately needed to find the boys seen with him. Thanks to countless tips from the public, they interviewed around 20 kids aged 10 to 18. While some were identified by witnesses, none were the boys they were seeking. However, on the evening of the Tuesday following James's disappearance, a breakthrough occurred. At least, it seemed like one. A suspect was arrested, and upon seeing the police enter his home, the community assumed he was the culprit. The outrage was palpable, with some people nearly rioting outside his home, attacking the police car transporting him. But this suspect was soon cleared. His family was never able to return to normalcy due to the anger and violence directed at them. What had initially seemed like a breakthrough turned out to be a dead end, and the police were back to square one. Then the BBC aired a segment on the case, showcasing the boys seen with James in the mall. Thanks to some expert enhancements, the footage was clearer than before. The police received a tip that would lead to 2 arrests. An anonymous caller revealed that her friend Susan had a son named John, who had a friend named Robert. These boys were known to skip school frequently, and interestingly, they had skipped school the day James disappeared. The 2 suspects, Robert Thompson and Jon Venables, were just 10 years old. Robert lived with his mother and had both younger and older siblings. His parents had divorced, and after that, his mother struggled with alcohol, leading to chaotic home life. Jon Venables also came from a troubled background, with his parents divorced and a history of behavioral issues. When officers went to question Robert, they were shocked by how small he was. When they arrived at his house, he began to cry upon realizing why they were there. They obtained a search warrant to check his clothes and found what appeared to be drops of blood on his shoes. His mother mentioned that he was aware of James's death and had even gone to lay flowers in his honor. When the police questioned John, he immediately said, "I knew you would come for me." This was in reference to his skipping school that Friday. His mother had assumed he was just out playing with paint, but they soon found evidence of a struggle. As the investigation unfolded, Robert and John initially attempted to downplay their involvement, but eventually confessed. The detectives painted a grim picture of what had transpired. They had encountered James, who had been crying, and their actions escalated to violence. The autopsy revealed horrific details about James's injuries. The detectives confronted Robert, who broke down, admitting that John had inflicted most of the violence while he tried to intervene. Meanwhile, John was also scared and overwhelmed, attempting to shift the blame onto Robert. The story of what happened to James Bulger is deeply disturbing and highlights serious issues of child safety and justice. It's a story that still resonates today, and as we reflect on it, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the treatment of Robert and John? Should their identities be protected, or does society have a right to know who they are? Thank you for joining me today. Please share your comments below. I appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you in the next video.